Check, check, check. Yeah, it works.
In our own homes. I'm thinking of how it says in Matovu Mishkanotecha from the word Mishkan, right, which we often translate as sacred sanctuary. The Zohar, the ancient, sorry, not so ancient, medieval mystical work describes the Mishkan as a dira b'tachtonim. It's apartment in the earthly realms. It uses the word dira, which means apartment. So as we're here, I'm in an apartment here in Cambridge, others are in their home. We can sort of experience our little dira b'tachtonim, our homes in the earthly realms with Matovu. Matovu halecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. Matovu halecha Yaakov Mishkanotecha Yisrael. So it's Parshat Tzav, which describes many of the offerings in the tabernacle. And as some of you might know, the offerings that were given in the temple became prayers when the temple no longer existed. Chanda and I, right before this service, are just talking about the word shacharit to describe our morning service. And the word shacharit comes from the offering that was given during the shachar, during the dawn at the temple. And today we have transformed that ritual into another ritual, which is prayer. And so in thinking about this Parsha's description of offerings, I thought we could begin our service just with dedications of how we might approach this service as our own offering to someone or something that's important to us. So if you want to raise your hand and come off mute or just put in the chat, is there a person or something else that you're dedicating your participation in this service to, that you're giving this offering towards? For folks who have learned with at least me or Ernest in a class, this is something we begin every class with. Janet says her friend Wendy Katz, who lost her sister last week. Any other dedications? Chanda says Julius Jones, who's being held in Oklahoma prison for life without possibility of parole, and shared a link, justiceforjuliusjones.com. Any other dedications? Marion's daughter, Rachel Bat Miriam, who is recovering from an injury. And I'll just share that I say my morning shacharit looking at Cambridge Health Hospital. And there are certain times where the care workers in that room are very recognized. And at this moment where our attention might be drawn in other places, I want to redirect my attention towards them. Linda's thinking of our Jewish friends in Dnipro, Ukraine, and Stacy's thinking of Phyllis Blau, a family friend. I'm sorry, Stacy, may Phyllis's memory be for a blessing. So with that, we're going to move to our morning blessings, our Birkot HaShachar. And because we're all on Zoom, I thought I'd take advantage in some spaces that I associate as activist spaces. When someone really agrees with something that someone else has shared in a Zoom meeting, they don't always say amen, but they often do this thing. They put a +1 in the chat. So if one of these morning blessings or multiple of these morning blessings really just hit you right where you are, feel free to say Amen, scream Amen on mute in your Zoom room, but you can also put a +1 in the chat. So we are grateful for the power of discernment. Asher natan l'sachvi vina. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu che'olamim. Asher natan l'sachvi vina levchin v'yom u'vein laila. We are grateful to be awake in the world. Hamavir sheinai me'enai. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu che'olamim. Hamavir sheinai me'enai u'tnuma me'achapai. We are grateful for our planet and its gifts. Rokaha haaretz al hamayim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu che'olamim. Rokaha haaretz al hamayim. We are grateful to notice the world around us. Pokeach ivrim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu che'olamim. Pokeach ivrim. We are grateful to be able to express ourselves through clothing. Malbish arimim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu che'olamim. Malbish arimim. We are grateful for the release of those unjustly incarcerated. Matir asurim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu che'olamim. Matir asurim. We are grateful to heal after we've fallen. Zokef kefufim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu che'olamim. Zokef kefufim. So we'll now begin to warm up our souls, our breaths with Elohai Neshama. Elohai neshama shenatata b'tzeho rahi. 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 So on most Shabbat mornings, our community sings this song, Elecha Adonai Akra, but I was especially thinking about and looking forward to singing it together this week because we read the Megillah on Wednesday night and on Thursday day. And maybe some of you might have noticed that in the Megillah, many dramatic, frightening things happen, many joyous, celebratory things happen, but none of the characters pray. So for all the prayer skeptics out there, you can maybe see yourself or find yourself in some of the Megillah's characters. They don't seem to be the praying types. But the rabbinic tradition likes to read between the lines and likes to see themselves in the characters of our sacred stories. And the Midrash in Esther Rabbah looks at the verse that describes Esther calling for a fast and imagines what might she have been praying? What might the Jews at that time, when they were so scared and feeling so vulnerable, what might have they been saying? And the Midrash imagines them reciting this verse from a psalm. So I thought we would sing it together this morning. Eilecha Adonai Ekra ve'el Adonai Etchanan. Eilecha Adonai Ekra Ve'el Adonai Etchanan Shema Adonai V'choneini Adonai Heye Ozer Li Shema Adonai V'choneini Adonai Heye Ozer Li Eilecha Adonai Ekra Ve'el Adonai Etchanan Eilecha Adonai Ekra Ve'el Adonai Etchanan Shema Adonai V'choneini Adonai Heye Ozer Li Shema Adonai V'choneini Adonai Heye Ozer Li. Kol Neshama translates the name of God in the last verse, Shema Adonai V'choneni, as "Hear, O Hidden One." And of course, Esther's name comes from Lehastir, to be hidden. So we'll begin with our songs of praise with Baruch She'amar. Let me try to get this all on one page. And so I'll invite folks, if they are able and wanting, to rise to begin stretching your joints, which are their own parts of creation. Baruch She'amar v'haya olam Baruch Hu Baruch Oseh Bereshit Baruch Shemo Baruch Omer v'yoseh Baruch Hu Baruch Ozer u'mekayem Baruch Shemo Baruch merachem al haaretz Baruch Hu Baruch merachem al habriot Baruch Shemo Baruch meshalem sachar tov l'reyav Baruch Hu Baruch ma'avir afela u'mevi ora Baruch Shemo Baruch chaylal v'kayam lanetzach Baruch Hu Baruch podeh u'matzil Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. So we'll sing Ashrei now, and Ashrei is may we have happiness, may we have Osher for the Yoshvei Beitecha, for those who dwell in the house, but it's also those who sit, who Yoshev on their Yashvan, on their Tuchis. So you might be seated if you've been standing for Baruch She'amar. This is a melody from a Jewish musician, Ali Halpert, that I shared a few weeks ago. So we'll begin in the English. Sorry, we'll begin in the Hebrew, but then continue in the English below the translation with I sing. Ashrei Yoshvei, Ashrei Yoshvei Veisecha, Ashrei Yoshvei Veisecha, Od Ye'alelucha Selah. That's it. Ashrei Yoshvei, Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Od Ye'alelucha Selah. I sing for you. I sing for what is holy and is true. I sing for all creation, for life and liberation, every day anew. I sing for you. I sing for what is holy and is true. I sing for all creation, for life and liberation, every day anew. If there's something else you sing for that Ali Halpert didn't have a chance to include, you can put it in the chat. Ashrei Yoshvei, Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Od Yehalelucha, Selah. Ashrei Yoshvei, Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Od Yehalelucha, Selah. So now that we are warmed up a bit, we'll think about ways in which we can praise that which is special, that which is sacred in our lives with all different instruments, be they drums or horn blasts, or be they our own voices. So we'll try out our different sounds with hallelujah. 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 El Bekodsho. Hallelujah. Bekiauzo. Hallelujah. Bigvurotav. Hallelujah. Kerov Gulo. Hallelujah. Beteka Shofar. Hallelujah. Benevel Vechinor. Hallelujah. 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 Betofu machol. Hallelujah. Bemini veugav. Hallelujah. Betzil telei shama. Hallelujah. Betzil telei trua. Kol anshamate. Hallelujah. Kol anshamate. Hallelujah. 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 So now that we've warmed up our nishamot with kol neshama to Hallelujah, we're going to think about the ways that not only are our nishamot warm, but that the breath of every neshama, the breath of every living being, praises that which is sacred, that which is dear to us. And I want to apologize. I have the pages from Kol Neshama so we can all look at the same Siddur together, but because I can only share one page at a time, I've opted for the Hebrew and the transliteration and not the English. I couldn't do both. So I apologize for that constraint. But if you're following along, we have both the link to the Siddur on our calendar event for this gathering. And also, I imagine some of you may have your own Kol Neshama at home. But we'll move to Nishmat Kol Chai, the breath of every living thing. Nishmat Kol Chai, Tevarech et Shimcha, Adonai Eloheinu, Veruach Kol Basar V'Tefar V'Teramem Zachar Chamalkinu Tamin Min. Melech Elata. We continue at the bottom of page 239. Mid Melech Umi Shavelach Umi Aruch Lach Ha'el Agadol Agibor Vanora El Elyon Kone Shamayim Voretz. Moving to page 241. Nelecha neshabechecha unefarecha unevarech et shem kodshecha kamur v'David barchi nafshi et Adonai v'chol kroivai et shem kodsho ha'el b'tatumotu zecha hagadol b'chlod shemecha hagibor lanetzach v'nora v'noratecha hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa. What's more Shabbat morning than Shochenad? Shochenad marom bekadosh shemo vechatuv ranenu tzadikim Adonai yesharim nevatila befi yesharim titromam uvdivrei tzadikim titparach uvilshon chasidim titkadash uvekerev kedoshim titalal Uvmakavot revavot amcha beit Yisrael. We continue in the middle of the page. Yishtabach shimcha le'ad malkeinu. We say a blessing on being able to praise, on being able to extend gratitude and kindness towards that which we want to be in a relationship with. Baruch atah Adonai, El melech gadol batishbachot, El hodaot Adon haniflot, Habocher b'shirei zimra, Melech elchei ha'olamim. So we're going to get ready for the Baruch Hu, but before we do, can I ask for a volunteer when I say Baruch Hu et Hashem HaMevorach in just a minute? Does anyone want to answer the call to prayer back to me? You'll have to come off mute. Any takers? Okay, I will answer for us. So feel free, if as you're able, to rise for as we bless in the middle of page 246. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. And the blessing gives us strength and makes our visions clear. And the blessing gives us peace and the courage to dare. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Voed. Feel free to be seated. We say a blessing on creation, the light and the darkness. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvarei choshech oseh shalom uvarei et hakol. Continue at the bottom of 249. Ha'me'ir la'aretz ladarim the one who brings light to the land and to the dwelling places, the dirot, the apartments that I mentioned earlier. Alea berachamim uvtuvo mechadesh bechol yom tamid varit maseh bereshit. We continue at the bottom of 251. Ein karkecha Adonai Eloheinu b'olam hazeh, ve'ein zuatecha malkeinu b'chayei olam haba. Hefes biltecha go aleinu limot hamashiach, ve'ein dov melech hamoshienu lechayei haolamim. El Adon al kol hamasim baruch u'mvorach mefi kol neshama gadol v'tuvo malei olam dat u'tvuna sovevim oto hamid goel chayot hakodesh v'nedar v'chavod ala mirkava Zechutu mishor lifnei chiso chesed verachamim lifnei kvodo tovim meorot shebara Eloheinu yetzaram bedat bevina uvaskel koach ugvura natan ba'en liot moshlim bekerev tevel eleim ziv ufikim noga Naez Yivam bechol haolam tzemechim besetam besasim bevoam osim be'ema retzon konam oiper v'chavod nonim lishmot tzala verina lezecher malchuto kara l'shemesh v'yizrach ora'a v'hitkin tzurat alvana Shevach u'notim lo kol tzeva marom tiferet u'gedula srafim ve'ofanim ve'chayot hakodesh aynai didinai inai 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 aynai inai inai didinai inai 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 aynai didinai inai Ay 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 nay diddy nay 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 ay nay 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 ay 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 nay 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 ay nay 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 ay nay 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 ay diddy nay 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 ay nay 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 nay. On page 268 we read Sheila Peltz-Weinberg, every day creation is renewed. Wake up and see unfolding in the spreading light of dawn. The world and all it contains coming into being new, fresh, filled with divine goodness and love. Every day creation is renewed. Reflected in the great lights, we see a new day, one precious day. Eternity. As we renew creation, we sing Or Chadash at the bottom of page 269. Or Chadash al Tzion Tayir v'nizkechu lanu bimheira le'oro. Chadash al Tzion Tayir v'nizkechu lanu bimheira le'oro. Or Chadash al Tzion Tayir v'nizkechu lanu bimheira le'oro. Baruch atah Adonai Yoitzer HaMeorot. So we move from the act of creation, the act of all the creative work we might be doing, maybe the artistic work we might be doing, and we think about how to ground that creative work, the art we make in our lives, in love, with Ahava Rabbah. Ahava Rabbah Avtanu Adonai Eloheinu Chem Lagedol Avitera Chamalta leinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Ba'avur Avoteinu, Shebat V'imotenu, Shebatchu V'cha, Shebatchu V'cha, V'avinu Malkeinu, V'telamden Chukechayim, Ken Techanenu Tlamdeinu, Avinu Avarachaman, Hamrachem Rachem Aleinu, V'ten Belibeinu Lehavinu Lehaskil Lishmoa Lilmodu Lelamed Lishmor Velasot Ulekayim et kol divrei Talmud Torah Techa Be'ava. On 275, V'ha'erinenu beTorah Techa V'dabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha V'yachei levaveinu le'ahava u'lirat shemecha V'lo nevosh v'lo nikalem V'lo nikasher le'olam voed Ki v'shem kodshecha Hagadol ve'anora b'tachnu Nagila v'nismecha v'shuatecha. Just want to pause before we say Shema for a moment. And again, apologize that we couldn't find a way to share the English and the Hebrew at the same time through our Siddur, but there's one word here, I'm pointing at it with my mouse, velo nevosh. It means like, let us not feel embarrassed. Busha ani mitbayesh in Hebrew would be like, I'm embarrassed. And it's a prayer longing to not feel embarrassed. And I want to honor that. That could be something that we all really long for. It's hard to be embarrassed, and we hope and yearn for communities and relationships where we can trust that we won't feel embarrassed. So we bring together our 4 tzitzit. The Baal Shem Tov says we bring together all the parts of ourselves that help us not feel embarrassed as we prepare to say Shema. V'havienu v'sholom merba kanfot haaretz v'tolichenu komil le'artzeinu ki el poel yeshuvot ata v'kerav tanu v'shimcha gadol sawa be'emet lehodot lecha le'yachadcha be'ahava baruch ata Adonai ohev amo Yisrael be'ahava Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Ve'avta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha. Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavcha hayom al levavecha. V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam. V'shivtecha b'beitecha u'v'lechtecha b'derech u'v'shochvecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam me'ot al yadecha v'yu etotafot b'neinecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha. I invite you, if you wish to read the traditional middle passages of Shema. Today I'm going to read the commentary from Rabbi David Teutsch on this section that I found just piercing, given our climate crisis today. What human action could result in the destruction of the rains, the onset of crop failure and famine? Abuse of the ecosystem upon which our very lives depend. And how could such an event occur? When we lose sight of our place in the world and the wondrous gift in all that is. The traditional second paragraph of the Shema was replaced by another biblical selection in earlier Reconstructionist liturgy because the traditional paragraph was understood as a literal reward and punishment, However, today, in the light of our awareness of the human abuse of the environment, we recognize that often this reward and punishment rest in our own hands. This ancient and yet vital message of the Torah urges us to choose life. And so as I think about what's in my own hands, the tzitzit that I have grasped together, we read the last paragraph of the Shema. Vayomer Adonai Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'talehem v'yasuem tzitzit, al kanfei vigdehem adoratam v'natnu al tzitzit, hakanaf betil techelet v'yalachem letzitzit, uritem oto. When you see the tzitzit, you'll remember all the sacred acts that you long to do. Uzchartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam. Velo taturu acharei lavchem ve'acharei nechem asher tanzonim achareihem le'man tiskeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'tem kedoshim eloichem ani Adonai Elohechem asher tzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim v'yot v'chem Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem Adonai Elohechem emet. And at the end of the Shema, we're reminded that we were liberated from Egypt. And so we continue as we are past Torah, marching towards our liberation and Passover. Oh my God, it's not too far away. Passover is right around the corner. We sing Mi Chamocha as we remember what it was to celebrate freedom. Tiwot Yon Baruch Mevorach Moshe Miriam Uvnei Yisrael Chanu Shira Besimcha Rabba V'Amru Chulam Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osefele, nora tehilot osefele, shira chadasha shivchu geulim leshimcha al sefat hayam, yachad kulam hodu vehimlichu. Ve'ameru Adonai Yimloch Leolam Voed. And so we'll prepare to say the Amidah. So I invite you, if you're able, to rise. And traditionally we face east towards Jerusalem, but wherever you're facing, I guess I call or want to invite you to pay special attention to what are you looking at as you prepare to say the Amidah. What are you noticing in your dirah, in your dwelling place? Tzur Yisroel, Kuma Be'ezrat Yisroel, Ufdechinu Mecha, Yehuda ve'Yisroel, Go Aleinu, Adonai Tzvot Shemo, Kedosh Yisroel, Baruch At Adonai, Gal Yisroel. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotinu V'Imoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, Ve'anora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'koinei Hakol, Ve'zocher Chastei Avot Ve'imot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, Ve'man Shemo Ve'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Bezrat Sarah. Atagibo Leolam Adonai, Rav Lehoshia, Mashiva Ruach Umorid Agashem, Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayei Meitim Be'erachamim Rabim. Somech noflim verofech cholim umatir asurim umekayem emunato lishemei afar oyoy Micha mocha bao gevurot. Umido melech melech memit. Umechaye. Umatzmiach Yeshua. V'neman ata lachayot kol chai. Baruch atah Adonai. Mechaye kol chai. Because we're on Zoom, we're not going to be doing the Kedusha, but I invite you to either daven the traditional Amidah or look at some of these prompts that Rabbi Tova has offered in times past as we feel the structure of our traditional Shabbat morning Amidah call us into reflection on some of the questions that are closest, at least to my heart. We'll take a few minutes for silent reflection, and we'll resume with Oseh Shalom. So we'll close the first part of our morning service with Oseh Shalom. The PDF says music by Elena Jagoda. My apologies to her. I do love her music, as does the Kita Gimel class at Dorsey's Religious School. I'm so privileged to teach. But I think I'll close with the Oseh Shalom of my childhood. Oseh Shalom, Shalom Bimromavu, Yaseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom, Shalom Bimromav, Yaseh Shalom. Yaseh Shalom. Shalom aleinu, oy, 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 ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Yaseh Shalom. Whew. I want to say shkoyach to all of you I've seen you like singing along or davening along. So thank you for being in it with us together. So we are so grateful and excited to have Rabbi Sandra Lawson with us today. And we're also joined by CDT's own Dr. Chanda Prescod-Weinstein. Professionally, Chanda is a professor of theoretical physics and a feminist theorist. And she's also the chair of the Jews of Color and Allies Advisory Group within the Reconstructionist movement. And through that capacity has worked with Rabbi Sandra Lawson, who's the movement's founding director of racial diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I thought that it would be very fitting to have Chanda introduce Rabbi Sandra Lawson. So without further ado, Chanda, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel, for that introduction and for that really beautiful Shacharit service. And I'm going to make a few remarks about the work that we're doing in Reconstructing Judaism after Rabbi Sandra talks. So first, I'm really excited to introduce Rabbi Sandra, who is someone that I think long before she knew I existed, I was following her on social media. As a queer Black Jewish woman, it was really exciting for me to watch her career as an RRC student. Rabbi Sandra Lawson is the first director of racial diversity, equity, and inclusion at Reconstructing Judaism. In this role, she works with senior staff, lay leaders, clergy, rabbinical students, and Reconstructionist communities like our own to help Reconstructing Judaism realize its deeply held aspiration of becoming an anti-racist organization and movement. Rabbi Sandra is developing a series of anti-racist policies and trainings for the organization and its affiliate members. And she also serves as a mentor to rabbinical students. And I just want to say overall, my impression is that Rabbi Sandra is just completely tireless in this work and probably actually very tired simultaneously. But it's very impressive just watching it from within the organization. So Rabbi Sandra is a barrier breaker, not just in Reconstructing Judaism, but from my point of view, in global Jewish history. When she graduated in 2018 from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, she became one of the first African-American queer female rabbis. And Rabbi Sandra is known for tackling difficult questions surrounding Jews and race in podcasts, essays, media appearances, and speeches. And she uses social media in very forward-thinking ways, modeling what it means to teach Torah in digital spaces. She has built a following of more than 50,000 people on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And she is also the founder of Kol Hapanim, All Faces, an inclusive Jewish community that is relevant, accessible, and rooted in tradition, where all who come are welcomed and diversity is embraced. And you can find that group on Facebook. In 2020, the Forward named Rabbi Sandra to its Forward 50, proclaiming her a truth teller, which is something that I think all of us at Dorsey Zedek are very excited about. Rabbi Sandra is originally from St. Louis and grew up in a military family. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees in sociology and is a veteran of the US Army, where she served with military police with a focus on investigations involving child abuse and domestic violence. And she subsequently used these skills to support hate group investigations by the Anti-Defamation League Southeast region. Before attending RRC, she ran her own personal training business and was an adjunct and professor of sociology at multiple community colleges. Prior to joining Reconstructing Judaism, Rabbi Sandra served as the associate chaplain for Jewish life and the senior Jewish educator at Hillel at Elon University in North Carolina. So I think we're just super lucky to have Rabbi Sandra in Reconstructing Judaism, and I'm really thankful that you could join us today. Thank you, Rabbi Sandra.
Thank you all so much for having me. It is in this sort of COVID world, it's always really good to be in Jewish spaces with people, even if it's Zoom. And I've been very grateful for Zoom, because we can still find ways to be together and connect. And I've actually, Chanda and I and Emmanuel were talking earlier about connecting with people online that we might not have connected with before. And, I've made a lot of friends in in this sort of weird universe and connected with people that I wouldn't probably have connected with otherwise. And I'm laughing because I've also found this interesting connection with a lot of members of the Orthodox world, including Chabad communities. And I've been fortunate enough to talk with Chabad rabbis on this subject that we are I'm going to be talking about. So I am someone who centers everything that I say around Torah. I think the Torah has a wonderful value system, and our Torah, because of how we read the Torah, we're always seeing it through our own current experiences. So a few weeks ago, we entered into the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, a book that talks a lot about sacrifices and holiness. This week, we learn about an offering of thanks, and next week, we will be reminded that we are holy beings. And this week's Torah portion is Tzav, which means command. In this week's Torah portion, it begins with a description of the perfect offering, which is kind of hard for me to miss because so many of us are striving to do just that, to create the perfect offering in our communities. I say that because many of us are trying hard, really, really hard, to be welcoming, inclusive, and to not be racist, especially when people of color come into our spaces. Many of us are so concerned about saying the right thing or accidentally saying the wrong thing that we do nothing to ensure our spaces are welcoming to people of color that want to come into our holy spaces. And that's the problem. So different demographic studies over the past 20 years have shown that the American Jewish community is becoming browner. The longer Jews live in the United States, we look like America, which means the same demographics we see in the US, we are seeing in Jewish community. The 2020 Pew study shows that 15% of Jews under 30 are Jews of color. And the Beyond the Count from a study done from the Jews of Color Initiative adds that 2/3 of American Jews of color were raised Jewish. With this in mind, Reconstructing Judaism is striving to be an anti-racist organization and movement. And in order to be anti-racist, that requires action. This means working every day, either emotionally or physically, to dismantle the racism that we have all been taught since day one of living in this country. To explain this to people, I often use an analogy of a baby. So imagine that we're all beautiful babies, because babies are beautiful, wonderful creatures, like probably one of the best of God's inventions. We're babies without bias, because as babies, we don't have any biases. We actually have to learn them. Now imagine that we are babies out in the rain getting wet. Now, what I tell people when I give this story is I run everything by my wife, who is highly critical. And the first time I use this analogy, she's like, she got focused on the baby. Like, why is the baby out in the rain? I'm like, just go with me. It's just an analogy. So don't worry about why the baby's out in the rain. The baby's okay. But imagine the baby's out in the rain, and that rain that is landing on the baby represents what we learn about different groups in our society. So that rain is racism, homophobia, sexism, anti-Semitism, and so on. And as we grow up, we continue to get rained on, and we continue to learn untrue stories based on stereotypes about Black people, brown people, and other people of color, and other marginalized groups. The messages the rain conveys about living in the United States tells us that in America, being white, straight, Christian is normative. So hopefully, as we grow up, we will notice and realize at some point that we are soaked from this rain. And we will try to unlearn all the biases that we have been taught, because we don't want to be racist. We don't want to contribute to a racist system. We want to actually treat everyone equally. So we dry off. The problem is that the rain returns, and the rain keeps coming back, and we have to continue to dry off. That getting wet and drying off, that's racism. Racism comes back, and we have to work hard by drying off, work hard to unlearn what we have been taught about Black people in our society. We all suffer the ills of racism because we are all a product of a system designed to privilege one group of people over another. And so this means that we can choose to be racist, or be anti-racist. And to be anti-racist, like I said earlier, it means action. You have to actively work against it. As a rabbi, I know firsthand that our congregations have allowed racism to actively interfere in the hiring of rabbis, rabbinical students, and the treatment of Jews of color in our synagogues, in our schools, and our camp. For this reason, I've devoted so much of my time to speaking out and writing about race and racism in the Jewish community. And a major reason I accepted the role as the Director of Racial Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Reconstructing Judaism, a position that I worked to help our movement create. My goal in this role my major goal in this role, and one of the reasons I accepted it, was to create an assessment tool for our congregation, for our congregational lay leaders and staff, to assess where our communities, or where those communities stand in terms of racial diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to begin to provide a path forward for continued transformation and learning. And so we piloted a program with 4 congregations that represent the vast diversity of our movement, from size, geographic diversity, racial diversity, just whatever diversity you can think of. I believe these 4 congregations represent that diversity. So if you are coming to our convention, either in person or virtually, you can learn about what these congregations learned about themselves during this process. And then after convention, Reconstructing Judaism, we will collect this data, which we've already started collecting, and refine this tool for wider use across our movement. And I've also gotten some inquiries to help people outside of our movement. This tool that I mentioned and this process associated with it presumes that a commitment to racial diversity, equity, and inclusion will infuse the leadership culture of a community, rather than be the special responsibility of a dedicated committee. The tool is designed to measure where a community and its leadership are. And it's not about judgment. It's a snapshot and an aid, not a final sealed portrait. Since the work of racial justice is always unfolding, this tool is designed to help leaders create communities that are inclusive and welcoming. And I want to backtrack a little bit, because that, to me, when it came out of my mouth, sounded a little clumsy. In doing this work, we wanted to make sure that our congregations did not see this as a judgment, like we're going to judge you because you have racist tendencies or you're not doing all the work. This work is fueled or informed by something we do during the month of Elul, which is Heshbon and Nefesh, like looking at ourselves internally, looking at the past year, seeing where we have missed the mark, and trying to do better in the future. So I'll close with going back to the Torah. So the word sacrifices sacrifice in Hebrew is korban, and sacrifices is korbanot. So in Hebrew, so we say the word sacrifice, which is not a really good translation for the word, because the root of korban does not suggest giving up as the word sacrifice does in English, but instead korban means to draw near or come close. And in a biblical sense, we're talking about coming close to the divine. The Torah teaches us that one who seeks to come near to God needs to be present and in the moment, needs to be fully present and in the moment. Doing anti-racist work to unlearn centuries of bias towards Black and Brown people is holy work that we must fully be present for, so that we can draw near to each other and to God, and to see the divine in all of us. Debarti. Thank you.
Amati. Thank you, Rabbi Sandra, for your words and your offering to us. I'll turn it over to Chanda, who will share about the work that she and Rabbi Sandra have been doing, and Chanda and her role as the chair of the Jews of Color and Allies Advisory Group. I just also wanted to just say, Rabbi Sandra, in thinking about what you just shared, I was reminded of this week's Parsha, which also has the verse, Eish tamid tukad al hamizbeach lo tikveh. You'll have an internal flame on the altar going always, don't extinguish it. And of course, that you'll have an eternal flame going always, don't extinguish it, seems redundant. And so the Chizkuni, the French medieval commentator, says, yeah, because you have to have the eternal flame going even on Shabbat. It's like we have to have the flame of equity inclusion in our communities, like even on Shabbat, and like especially on Shabbat, oftentimes. So with that, I want to turn it over to Chanda to share a bit about her work and to be in conversation with Rabbi Sandra.
So I want to start by, bringing some of what Rabbi Sandra just said into conversation with, everyday real life things. So I was the victim of a racist incident in one of my departments this week. And when I called my department chair to chew her out for how it had been handled, one of the things I said is nobody checked on me. Not only did nobody speak up, but nobody checked on me. And she said, well, one person contacted me and said that she wanted to check on you, but she couldn't decide whether she should check on you privately or if she should say something publicly. And so she didn't say anything at all. So of course, like the initial incident that was perpetrated was harmful. But in fact, ultimately, the thing that felt most harmful for me was that nobody checked on me and nobody stood up for me. And so people in their paralysis chose silence, and that silence was the worst possible outcome in the situation ultimately. So I want to hit home what Rabbi Sandra said, that when you get stuck between am I going to say the wrong thing and saying nothing, err on making a mistake but sounding like you care and showing that you care, even if your caring comes out in a less than ideal way. So this sounds like maybe I just wanted to share a personal story, but part of the reason that I'm bringing this up as an example is that within the Jews of Color and Allies Advisory Group, when I was first asked to consider taking on this leadership role, this was one of the first things that came up in conversation with people, as incidents like these happen within our sacred spaces, which are our temples, are sacred spaces. And Jews of color are left wondering, if this is my sacred space and it has been sullied and I do not feel safe here, then where can I go? Where is there a place for my Jewishness? And so I think at the heart of what we are tasked with doing in the Jews of Color and Allies Advisory Group is helping to transform and provide leadership to Reconstructing Judaism in transforming all of our communities so that these sacred spaces are equally safe and truly sacred for all of us, regardless of what our ascribed and racialized identities are. And so a piece of that has to be, Rabbi Sandra is in this new and very incredible role. And as I said, tirelessly is maybe not even the right word, because I think that this work is very tiring. We have to be very cautious as a movement, not to say, well, Rabbi Sandra is doing that work for us, but that this is work that Rabbi Sandra can help set guidelines, etc., and set a light for the direction that we move in. But we as a movement have to take ourselves there. And similarly, the Jews of Color and Allies Advisory Group. So part of our role is to support the work that Rabbi Sandra is doing, and to support the work that Amanda Mbuvi, as head of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, who I believe is the first Black person of any kind to helm a rabbinical college in the United States, to support the work that she is doing, to support the growing number of students of color who are in the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and who are going to go out into our world seeking congregational roles and to create an environment where they can be welcomed. So that's kind of the big picture of what we are thinking about. And thinking very closely, I want to acknowledge the vice chair of the group, Lazora Jordan, who is definitely playing an important role in leading the group. So Rabbi Sandra and I are not the only two people who are playing leadership roles in the group. On a practical level, I'll just share that what's happening right now is that as the advisory group is a new idea within the movement. And so structurally figuring out how we fit into what the movement does is something that we're still working out. So for example, there are conversations, hopefully many of you attended the Day of Learning on Reparations that Reconstructing Judaism had last year. Lazora was one of the people who led that. As you all are aware, the Tikkun Olam Commission of Reconstructing Judaism has made racial justice its current priority. And so we're having lots of discussions about reparations. So right now we're navigating, for example, when things come out of the Tikkun Olam Commission, do they just go to the board of Reconstructing Judaism? Where I should say I sit on the board as part of this role as a voting member of the board. Or should they go through the advisory group? And so we are just starting to have those kinds of conversations. And a good example of the way that our presence is shifting things. So we have our Centennial Convention coming up just next week. And so the safety protocols, Rabbi Sandra played a really active role in developing the safety protocols for the convention. And actually the advisory group twice looked at the proposals and offered feedback to ensure that the needs of Jews of color and other marginalized, minoritized groups within the Jewish community were accounted for. So, talking about the intersection of what it means to be racialized and also have your pronouns questioned and your presence in the bathroom questioned and that kind of thing. So those are the kinds of things that we are working on. We are still really finding our bearings. There are about, I actually didn't count, I think there are about 8 of us in the group at this point in time. We are not all Jews of color. We do have white members of the group. We also have a rabbinical student from RRC who's in the group. And I'm so far, it's a really lovely group of people. I will be honest and say that it's also so far a difficult role to play because there are a lot of moving parts. And structurally, Reconstructing Judaism was not designed with groups like ours in mind, or even the kinds of work that we are doing in mind. And so part of the work really will be shifting what Reconstructing Judaism is at the most basic level and how it has traditionally functioned. So I see my job as helping us get through this kind of like bylaws organizational stage, and to create the conditions where we can flourish in the long term, and where the members of the group don't feel overwhelmed, but do feel supported. So I think I will stop there, and I think we have some time for Q&A for both me and Rabbi Sandra.
Thank you,
Can I just say something? I want to say one of the really amazing things for me, one, I don't have to do this work by myself, which is really cool. And I learn every time I work with Chanda and Lazora, I learn something. I learn a lot. And it is a reminder that even as a Black woman, a Black queer woman, you know, we are not, you know, I can't think of the word. We're not single-minded. We all have like, we all come from very diverse backgrounds. And it's just a reminder how important it is to have diverse voices in everything that we do. And I also want to say we had a staff meeting on Friday where we talked about our security protocols. And what I said to the staff is that for the longest time, all of our security plans focused on one group of people, keeping one group of people safe. That was never the intention, but that was the reality. So now imagine a safety protocol that makes sure that everyone is safe. And so I'm going to go back to what I started with, which is saying that I love working with Chanda, and I'm just grateful to be in this space, this virtual space, and I'm hoping for one day to be in the same physical space.
Thank you both for sharing with us and taking the time to relay all that's been going on, and also for the work that's been a matter of weeks, months, and years. We have time for a few questions, so I'll queue people up, but if anyone wants to raise their hand either in the Zoom feature, if you go on reactions, or raise their hand physically, or put something in the chat just so I know that you have a question, we can see. I see a hand from Peter.
Yeah, hi. Thank you to both of you for joining us and talking about this subject. So my question for either one of you is, it's to me at least, the working relationship between the movement and the individual congregations has always been confusing, a little hard to understand. And so with respect to all matters. So I'm wondering if you've had the opportunity to start thinking about how an individual congregation such as CDT might work with you on these issues. It sounds like a lot for you folks just to say, oh, you know, everybody can call us up and ask about it. I'm not sure that sounds practical, but I'm just wondering what you've been able to think about so far on that topic.
Yeah, it is something we're actively thinking about. And yeah, you're right. Like the simple thing is that let's just call Rabbi Sandra up and she'll come and help us. But I have a partner in crime. His name is Rabbi Michael Weiss, and we are with Thriving Communities working to create protocols for congregations on, like, you know, if you want me to come, and then part of the protocol is there's a series of questions you have to answer. And then I will work in partnership with your liaison, who I'm blanking on who it is right now, but every congregation has a liaison. And I will work with the liaison to work with congregations. And Thriving Communities is also part of that, because I sit in the president's office, but and I sit in Thriving Communities, because a lot of my work is with congregations. And this pilot that I created right now has me working very closely with congregations, like I said, and they go through a series of steps and meetings and readings and conversations and things like that, to unpack where they actually are. And this is important because many people don't know where they are on these issues. I have had conversations with congregational leaders who think that they are much further ahead than they are in racial justice. And then I find out that they're not. And I've talked to other leaders who think they're not doing enough, and they're actually doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing. So this is a work in progress. And I would say that my advice right now for your congregation is to reach out to your liaison and begin that conversation with your liaison to learn more about the work that we're doing and how we can help your congregation.
I will just add on to that, in the long term, we have one Rabbi Sandra and a lot of reconstructing Jewish communities. Thankfully, we have many communities. And so certainly one of the things that's in my view, something that needs to happen in the long term is that we need to have more than Rabbi Sandra who has a competency in doing these kinds of trainings and having these kinds of conversations. And so that's certainly that's part of the bigger picture.
Yeah, I concur. It's just one me.
Thank you both. There's a tremendous amount of gratitude and appreciation and engagement in the chat that I want to recognize. We'll have one more question from Bob Warren, our president. So Bob, please.
Thank you, Rabbi Sandra and Chanda. I know it's a work in progress, but I wonder if you can give us an example of a congregation that's reached out to you with some specific problems that have arisen, and what type of steps have you taken maybe to address those issues? I know in our congregation, there's other folks in this service who could talk about, we're going to do an audit of the congregation too, of what our issues are, but maybe something you can give us an example of, I would call it a success or just some steps you've taken. That would be helpful.
So just listening to this, there's a lot, and I'll just draw on one story. So, and this is actually an example where I took a seat back and let my white colleague do it because of how the congregation was functioning. So one of our congregations in the South is doing some amazing work on racial justice. They have an amazing racial justice team. They're really trying to be anti-racist, and they're doing all the things that you're supposed to do. And this is one of the rabbis who think she's not doing enough. So this rabbi reached out to us, and their liaison is Michael Weiss, Rabbi Michael Weiss. And so Michael Weiss and myself met with this congregation. And the issue that they had is their racial justice working group, I don't know if that's the actual name, but that's what I'm going to call them, put together a brief basically on how to, what our community looks like, how to treat people. It was a heavy focus on racial justice, and they were going to vote on it. And the challenge was that she knew that there was a very small but loud group of people in her community that just didn't want this to happen for whatever reason. And so because of that, I didn't go, Micah went and talked about our strategic plan, talked about where our movement is going, talked about how this is not just your rabbi, this is the direction that the movement is going, giving the rabbi cover, like this is, giving the rabbi cover, saying this is what we are about, and this is what we're doing. And as far as I know, it was a success, and I need to check in with that rabbi to see where they are. And so that is one example. But I've actually learned a lot about how congregations function, and in this process, the leaders that I've worked with have learned a lot about themselves, which is always more important.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll hear from our director of congregational learning, Ernest, who has a question, and with that we'll wrap up the conversation. But I first wanted to give an opportunity for Ernest to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chanda and Rabbi Sandra. Rabbi Sandra, Yasher Koach on the tool that you're creating. That's amazing. And Chanda, it feels really exciting to have you as a Dorsey member doing this foundational transformative work at RJ. And I'd love to learn more over time about the vision for that foundational work that you're talking about how.
Me too.
Right, it seems like it's evolving. One thing that I wanted to like lift up, I don't mean to ask it so that there's like, what's your programmatic plan for this? But I am curious if there are things percolating. We had like a Purim event with our like middle-aged kids, and all the kids of color were like together, having a great time. We don't, in different grades. And usually because of COVID, they're not together. And they were like making masks, and someone brought up Doja Cat. And I was like, oh, Doja Cat is Jewish. And they were like, oh my God, and so excited. And I've seen them lit up about finding out about like famous Jews of color before. And even though there's this data about how many Jews of color there are, I feel, and my sense is that they don't really know that in their bones, and haven't necessarily had that lived experience of like feeling like there are a lot of other people around that share multiple identities with them. And I'm just curious about like within our movement potential for youth to connect and just, yeah, not necessarily like what's the program, but just, yeah, sharing that. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I'm happy to start with this one. I think that this is a really central question for the group. And one of the earliest conversations that Lazora and I had was specifically about what it means to be embodied in these spaces, which I think is part of the question that you're asking, right? Is like being physically present in these spaces and the way that things are written on the body for us in different ways. And I also think it's like a long-term Jewish tradition of being excited when you find out that a famous person is Jewish, right? And then there's just like an added layer to it when, for me as a Black Jew in particular, any Jew of color, but especially a Black Jew, I'm like super hyped. Like I was also very excited when I found out a few years ago that Doja Cat was actually also Jewish, right? So I share that with them. I think from my point of view, one of the questions that I'm interested in is, one, we are experiencing these demographic changes, but demographic changes are slow and they're unevenly distributed geographically. And so, you know, a congregation in New York is having a very different experience from a congregation in Boston, for example, just because of like even how people are distributed, not to say that there isn't Black Boston, right? But Black Boston tends to be a little more segregated than in other cities, for example. What I really want to think through partly is not just how we can draw those connections, because those organizations exist and we can start to work better with them, right? There are camp spaces that are thinking about these things. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel at RJ. We do have to do a better job of drawing those connections. But I also want Jews as a larger community to think about the fact that Jews have always been minorities in pretty much every geographic region they've been in, with very few exceptions, right? And so this is something that Jews as a community actually should intuitively understand what it means to be the stranger in a strange land. Like this is literally written into our Torah. So the question is, why is it that there is such difficulty in transforming the experiences of people who are minoritized within the minority community? And that, I think, is a piece that actually I want to throw back to the larger community of why is it so difficult to accept that people might feel minoritized, right? And to respond to that accordingly, because we go out into the Christian hegemonic world constantly being like, why can't you guys understand? Why do so many white Jews, frankly, have difficult times bringing that sensibility internally and realizing that sometimes there are places where we get to feel like the majority, but there are still other people who don't feel that way about it, right? So I think, you know, just as a practical thing, and then I'll stop, is just to say money is a really big issue, and it's something that we don't talk about, how expensive it can be to be Jewish in a formal sense, right? And I know that this is a real passion point for Lazora, which is simply addressing the cost of being a member of a congregation. And I know here at CDT, we, you know, work to try and make that so it's not an issue. But it's still a thing where if you're poor, you have to tell someone that you're poor, right? And so I think that that's something that we really need to talk about, is how money shapes whether people even enter these spaces or attempt to.
That's great. I'm just going to add something that may not actually answer your question, but it's something that came up listening. And I am someone who does like to read demographic studies. And so not only do these studies show the racial diversity of the Jewish community, there's also a shift in where Jews are going physically. So Jews are leaving large, and COVID is also playing a role in this, but are leaving large congested areas. So that means, like, let's just hypothetically say that a lot of Jews of color, most Jews of color, live in New York. I don't know if that's true or not, but people are sort of tired of living in congested areas, and they want more space, more land. And say North Carolina has seen a huge shift in Jews, particularly Jews of color. And yesterday I got an email message from someone who follows me online. She's Black, her husband's white, they have kids, they're Jewish, and they want to leave, I think Miami or something, for North Carolina. And so I'm bringing this up because this is something that I want all communities to think about, regardless if you have regardless if you have adults of color. I haven't talked to a synagogue yet that doesn't have kids of color. That this is like urgent. Like, you have to start thinking creatively about this, even if you don't have people of color, because we're coming. And if a family member comes to a synagogue, let's just say your synagogue, and often if it's a multiracial family, that might mean the white member will come first. If it doesn't smell right, or if that parent who wants to protect their child senses racism, and racism is coded in a lot of ways, they're not going to come back. And you won't know why. You won't even know, but they'll tell their friends. And I know right now who to talk to if I want to go visit a synagogue, and I know which synagogues, I'll find out which synagogues to go to and which ones are not to go to. So, if we really want to be inclusive and welcoming, and I do believe in all of, in my heart of hearts, I don't think any synagogue is trying to keep people out. I think we all want to be welcoming, but we have to think creatively about what our communities will look like for people of color. And are we really a space that is a house for all people, which is a verse in Isaiah. So, yeah. I know, Ernest, I didn't really answer your question, but it came up. I think Chanda did an excellent job of answering it. Also, I want to say too, children, Camp Havaya, according to our executive director, Rabbi Isaac Sapatnik, which I was surprised to learn, has more Black campers than any other camp in the United States. So I think that is, I don't know how that happened, but that is really awesome.
Thank you, Rabbi Sandra and Chanda and Ernest, for your question. I'll just say again, there's a lot of very important conversation in the chat as well. Chanda, a little while back, posted an article that she wrote for Evolve. I'll just say I quickly clicked that link and smashed that bookmark button because I imagine many of us have no, where did the chat go? So I invite you to do that for after services if you're like me, planning on reading Chanda's writing then. I just want to say again how grateful I am and we are as a community to host you, Rabbi Sandra, and to hear from you, our member Chanda. Just as a word of closing, I was thinking, Chanda, when you described the Jewish experience of all Jews on some deep root level as one of being a minority, as you identified within our Torah. And I was thinking about this time in the Jewish calendar that you've both come to speak with us. And it's right between Purim and Passover. And Purim, the Megillah, is kind of a scary book. And that's why we laugh at it, to have a cathartic moment with that fear. But it's a scary book in part because at the end, it's basically all still the same. The Jews are just as vulnerable under the whim of this impulsive king as they were at the beginning. And if another Haman comes, the Jews are in the same situation as they were the first time around. And so we might describe that reality as no structural change. And then we come to Passover, which is about transformation, going from a narrow place to an open place. And so to hear from both of you on the Shabbat as we move from the lack of structural change of Purim to the transformation of Passover and all the work you're both doing to bring about that kind of transformation in our communities and the way we can each have a role in supporting that is really a gift. So thank you. We're going to close our service with a few blessings. We're first gonna start with the Mishaberach, the prayer for healing. So in just a moment, I'll read a list of names of people who are dear to members of our congregation in need of healing, but I also invite you to share in the chat the names of anyone that you are thinking of. So as we say the Mishaberach, I wanna read the names of Chana Leah Bat Shira Sivan, Shalom Ben Sipora, Dov Ben Zalman, Ilana Bat Yaakov, Nama Bat Laila, Chaim Ben Chaya, Nachama Tzipora Bat Henya, Yonatan Ben Meir Zalman, Harav Tzvi Ben Leah, Simcha Bat Chava, Rachel Bat Miriam, Yonina Bat Gidel, Harriet Budd, and Joyce Tracer. Mishaberach Avoteinu Mekor Abracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu Mekor Habracha Leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say. So we'll move to close our Torah service with singing a song to the tree of life that we hold. Eitz chaim hi lama chazikim ba v'tomcheya meushar deracheha darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva Chadesh yameinu kekedem. So we've been sitting for a while. So if you're able, I invite you to stand for Aleinu and stretch out your knees before you might use them to give a little bend. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, lateit gedula l'yotzer breshit, shenatan lanu torat emet, v'chayei olam nata betocheinu. V'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech malchei amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, they're coming. We'll continue on the bottom of page 449 with Kakatub in the transliteration. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד. ושמו echad. So we'll begin to conclude our service with mourner's Kaddish. So those who are not in mourning are invited to take a seat, and those who are saying Kaddish are invited to rise. Feel free. Everyone's invited to share in the chat anyone who they may be remembering. I saw Phyllis Glazerman on the Zoom, and of course we're remembering her dear husband Al, a CDT member who passed away wow, it's been over a week, about 10 days ago. So we're of course remembering Al. So as we hold the names in our heart, Jessica's father, Bob, Suzanne's parents, Diane and Norman, Edith Magaziner, and of course we're thinking of Phyllis and Winda's uncle, Al. So those who are remembering a loved one are invited to join me. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba ve'almad zivrach yirtei v'amich machutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael v'galal v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach v'olam umei amaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. So Linda, one of our board members, is here to bring us into focus with all that is going on at CDT this week and in the coming days with announcements. So thank you, Linda, for being here today and offering some announcements. Linda, are other folks unable to hear Linda? Linda, we still seem to be unable to hear you. Hearing 1 second.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, crystal clear.
Okay, sorry about that. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much to Rabbi Sandra and Dr. Chanda for your inspiring words today. It's been wonderful to hear from you. Several of us from our congregation will be with Rabbi Sandra next week for the anti-racism intensive, and we look forward to sharing that with all of you at CDT. And a warm welcome to all of our members, guests, and families. For details about upcoming events and Zoom links, please visit the CDT calendar. Here are some of the highlights of this next week. On Monday evening at 7, join Rabbi Toba in conversation with Rabbi David Jaffe for a virtual crowdcast event hosted by Porter Square Books to celebrate the release of her book, God is Here. Then later that evening, all CDT members who are male are invited to join the CDT men's group at 8 p.m. On Saturday afternoon at 2, weather permitting, we will finally be able to join Jennifer Nichols for a light hike at Beaver Brook Reservation. Please stay tuned in case of poor weather. Then at 8 o'clock tomorrow, all are welcome to join the Cdt Film Club for discussion of the 2014 film East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, Peace Through Music. And don't forget to save the date for CDT's next member meeting happening on Sunday, April 3rd from 4:30 to 6 in Fellowship Hall, and on Zoom. Please check your email for a personalized link from Evite where you can learn more and RSVP. And lastly, next Shabbat, there will not be any CDT services as the Reconstructing Judaism Convention will take place. Please let the office know if you'll be attending, either virtually or in person in Virginia, so that we can plan a meetup with all of our CDTers. Shabbat Shalom to all.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Linda. So we will begin to wrap up with Adon Olam. Feel free to join in your Diraba Tachtonim, which we began with, right? Your apartment in the earthly realms. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Li'eit Nasa B'Cheftzov Kol Hazayin Melech Shemo Nicha Ve'acharei Kichot HaKol Levado Imloch Nora Ve'u Haya Ve'u Odeh Ve'u Yiyeh Ve'tifara Ve'u Echad V'ein Sheini Le'am Shilo Le'achbira Beli Reshit Beli Tachlit Ve'lo Oz Ve'am Yisrael Ve'u Eili V'chai Goali Ve'tzur Chevli Be'yetzara Ve'u Nisi Umanosli Menat Kosi Be'yom Ekra Ve'yado Afkid Ruchi Ve'tishan Ve'ayira Ve'im Ruchi Geviati Adonai li ve'lo ira. Want to extend gratitude again to Rabbi Sandra and to Chanda for being with us this morning and sharing words of Torah. I poured a Kiddush cup with grape juice at 9:58 a.m. before services, and it has been sitting on my windowsill since then. Dennis, our AV tech person, thank you, Dennis, can break us out into Zoom Kiddush rooms for those who would like to chat in just a moment. But if you want to enjoy your morning with something sweet or a drink of something that makes you feel like it's Shabbos, it might be a good idea to keep the demons away. So I'll end with Kiddush. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, la'asot et Shabbat v'torotam brit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti olam, ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim v'et haaretz. Uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat va'inafa, shal kein berach Adonai, et yom haShabbat va'yikadshehu. Savri, l'chaim. Baruch Adonai melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Good morning for the East Coasters and those joining us from the West. Yes, we're going to do Kiddush, so feel free to stick around for that. And we're going to just throw you in randomly in with other people from the congregation, so have fun. Take care. If you need anything, feel free to pop out and let me know. Enjoy.
So why were we only in the breakout room for like 2 minutes?
2 minutes. We didn't even get 2 minutes. What happened, Dennis?
What happened?
that-
Wait, did you ask me?
Was
Who's
that a
in charge?
mistake?
I'm not in charge.
I know, Ernest, isn't that exciting that you're not in charge, that you don't need to take
Well,
responsibility for
Okay, we're
this?
all together.
Not
Who
the
is in
host.
charge?
Yeah, who's in charge?
Dennis is in charge.
Dennis,
and
what happened?
Oh,
Dennis is the CDT guest one account.
Guest one.
Yes,
believe-
one.
There it is.
You know, this is okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
what's
that
wrong
this
with
is
this?
a fine group for everyone to.
We're all good.
Well, I was bringing up in our group that a number of us grew up in very Irish cities with St. Patrick's Day, and then being Jews growing up at St. Patrick's Day, and then thinking about minorities within minority, the minorities within the minority. I mean, a lot of us, several of us grew up in Chicago with the Green River on St. Patrick's Day, and this year Purim and St. Patrick's Day coalesced. You know what people's experiences growing up have been with that.
Well, you're right now surrounded by a green line on my Zoom.
There you go.
I don't think that many people here have been around long enough to remember Ken's restaurant in Copley Square. But it was my dad and my uncle's restaurant, and on St. Patrick's Day they had green bagels and green beer. And we were just talking before we all got together how awful the green bagels looked. Because I said I wished I had a bagel with a schmear.
We
Anyway.
had bagels too at our local bagel shop in New Jersey.
Yeah. Ernest, I just wanted to say one thing about your comment about the kids of color and during the Purim activities.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of the book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?
Yes.
Fabulous book. I did a lot of anti-racism work when I was teaching at the Windsor School. And that was one of the books we read, and it was really helpful.
Yeah.
I don't, where we are. It was very
So
helpful.
weird.
I suggest you get it.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't even, I thought it was great that we had an opportunity for the kids in multiple grades to be together. I wasn't surprised by that. I was happy that they had the opportunity.
Yeah.
To hang out together.
Yeah, it was like really beautifully. Like I thought it was really beautiful that you brought that up. Yeah. But
I guess I will say, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh,
thought
and
you
I
were
was
done,
just saying,
Susan.
like, especially like in this time when people aren't seeing each other a lot in person, or different grade levels aren't together, just to have the opportunity for people to go into groupings that they wish to be in at that moment. It just, I don't know, something about it was really, really nice. I don't know, I thought.
I have been a member of CDT since 2014, Kevin, is that right? Since 2014. And I will say I have been actually surprised that at no point have I ever been asked to meet with the kids of color in the temple. Like, that's never happened.
Wow.
And Ernest, I know you're newer here, and so you don't know most of that history, but that's a piece of it. Is
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
even when there are Jews of color in the temple, those connections aren't even being drawn within the temple. And I think sometimes the assumption is that the Jews of color are the parents of the kids of color, right? But of course, that's often not true for various reasons.
Yeah.
Including that sometimes the children are adoptees, right?
Yeah.
Chandra, we're so lucky that you chose us. I'm sure it's hard to speak up, and but it's such an honor. I feel like when people choose to speak up, because it means you're choosing to stay in our community and help us grow. And I really hope I know we're a congregation that wants to continue to grow. And Rabbi Sandra, I've just admired you for so long. It's such an honor. I'm like, there she is. It's not even in person, it's Zoom. I can watch you on Google, but somehow it felt one thing that I've been really inspired by and also supported is Keshet has done quite a bit of LGBTQ kids of color and their experiences during Passover, especially in adoptive families. And not always having kind of kinship with people even around the table in your own home. So I just think there's a lot of growth happening in a lot of areas. I'm feeling hopeful, even though we have a long way to go and we keep getting wet.
So, hi Susan, and I hope you take what I'm about to say with the open-heartedness that I'm giving it, but I can often be clumsy when I'm not scripted. I think I think it's awesome that Chanda speaks up, and there are a lot of Jews of color that do, and there's also a lot that don't, and that the responsibility of learning needs to be on all of us. And if you have people of color in your community, and you never hear a story of racism, that doesn't mean it's not there. Jews of color are making a lot of choices and decisions around where they go to synagogue, and talking about racism may not be one of them. So I just wanted to add that, like, you have somebody in your community that does speak up, but that is not. I have colleagues who have no interest in rabbis who are people of color who have no interest in talking about the subject. And that's, and they are frustrated that they are often asked to. And I made a choice, and they make different choices.
Thank you, Rabbi Sandra, for saying that. I will actually say that I started attending services less because of a couple of incidents of racism over the last couple of years within CDT spaces. And that it is always like an extremely heavy lift for me to, like, I'm sure Ernest won't mind me saying that I had to send him and Rabbi Toba a note in February about something. And that was actually, it took a lot out of me. And pretty much every single time that happens, I don't want to come to services anymore. Like, it takes months for me to be like, I would like to go back to that space. And this is one of the reasons that when I was making my comments, I talked specifically about like sacred space being robbed. Really, I didn't say it like this, but being robbed of sacred spaces, because then you lose your sense of like, that's a space where I can actually go and have peace. Because it's not a peaceful place, right? And so I come from a family where I was trained to speak up. And actually, I will say, in the context of the incident I shared a little bit about this week, the flip side of that is that people often read you as, well, you can speak up and so you're okay. When actually like I am sleeping poorly right now because I'm really not okay about what happened, right? But one of the reasons nobody checked on me is they were like, well, she was comfortable speaking up, so it's fine. And they just have this conception of you as a voice as opposed to a person, right? So not at all saying that that's what you were doing, Susan, but I do actually think that that's like a factor, and that's like a great example of exactly what I was talking about, that the moment you feel called to do that work in the temple and you don't see other people doing the work before you, suddenly you're like, oh, this is a workspace and not a sacred piece. Like, there's no shalom here for me. There's shalom for others, right?
I want to tell you all.
Chanda, sorry.
I want to just tell you a quick story, which I hope will put some light on this. There's a black trans person here in North Carolina that I talk with occasionally, and they are a burnt out activists. They are working really hard to make change. And I said to them, they met me for coffee early one Friday, and I said, you need Shabbat. I said, I don't care if it's Saturday, you need Shabbat. You need like a reset. And they said to me, I know, Rabbi, and I love my rabbi, but I don't like walking into that synagogue, because even though I've been a member of that synagogue for over a decade, people still treat me like I don't belong. And I said, well, if you want to hang out with a bunch of college kids who were so wrapped up in themselves, they most likely will not, ask you inappropriate questions, and they'll be so excited to host you because they love hosting, and they love hosting people for Shabbat. So they stuck around and they came to services with our college kids, and I was right. They were so excited to have a guest, and they, treated them like a king, queen, non-binary royalty, and they loved it, and it was what they needed. And they said, Rabbi, you're right, I didn't need Shabbat. Now, I don't expect this person to go hang out with college students every Shabbat. And this was also an example, like how we Jews who want to engage need space, need holy spaces. And Jews of color that I encounter want those spaces. They want to be part of a community. We have enough Jews that don't want to be part of a community. But for Jews of color who do, we can't, we're 1.9% of the American population. We can't afford to be losing people who actually want to participate in Jewish life. But anyway, I just wanted to share that story of this person who had a wonderful experience hanging out with my college kids.
Do you mind if I
Can,
so I just wanted to like just say something, Chanda, to you. First of all, like I'm so glad to, meet you. I'm not around much just for personal reasons, but I wanted to speak in solidarity with you. I know that I am not Black, I'm white, but I wanted to speak in solidarity with you about the feeling, hearing this, true heart, your feeling about not always feeling, safe even in our space and our collective space. And my area has been inclusion of persons with disabilities. That's my world, because of my child who passed away actually a few years ago. And so that's where my work has been. And I've had experiences of, difficult experiences, more than difficult experiences, years. And I'm not saying I know your perspective, but I just wanted to speak in solidarity with you, Chanda.
so I would like to say something which is hard to say, so I hope you'll bear with me. And I want to be clear that I want us all to feel very safe in community together. So I don't know if what I feel is something that other people feel, or maybe it's not, but, and I've done a lot of work in our anti-racism group. I would just like to say it would be very helpful to hear, and I know it's hard to do that, and I'm not asking anybody on this Zoom call to do it necessarily, but we hear about people of color feeling uncomfortable, somehow responded to in a way that doesn't feel right to them. And I'm certainly sorry for that. It would be helpful to know what some of those situations are, not necessarily from the person who experienced them, but I think we've all heard the list of some things that have been said or asked of people, and maybe that's it. But it feels to me like sometimes we're being asked to change something, but we're not sure exactly what it is we're being asked to change. So I just want to put that out there. And I thank both of you, Rabbi Sandra and Chanda, for being here with us to try to think through these things together.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say it is 12:03, so I do want our guests to feel like they can go on with their Shabbos, given the timing. But luckily, like there's so much that people have written about racism in Jewish space and other media that we can access, and we certainly have access to lots of narratives. And I think my sense is that a lot of what happens in other synagogues that have been spoken about or written about is also the same type of stuff that happens in our community. So I'm curious if one possibility for that is, I don't know exactly what people have been learning in Undoing Racism lately, but if it's been more generally about racism in the US, we could also try and emphasize reading works by Jews of color about Jewish space.
So I will sign up, but I will. I thank you, Luis, for bringing that up, and I hear you. And often, sometimes the examples that are used may not land the same way, that they do to people of color. And I would ask you to imagine, one I'm sure you've heard a lot, is when Jews of color walk into a synagogue, they're asked, when did you convert, that's the one that's coming to mind. So imagine if you were asked that repeatedly over and over and over and over and over again when you walk into a space, how exhausting that could be. And from the person asking, it's a place of curiosity, but it's actually not. It's actually trying to see how that person fits into whatever framing that the person asking has about Judaism. It's actually not about curiosity or getting to know the person. And I say that because often when people of color ask that question, they put up a boundary, like, I just came here to pray, I just want to find my seat, whatever. Then about curiosity, that's about the white person feeling safe. And as a rabbi, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I experienced where people know that I'm a rabbi. So one example is when I was a campus rabbi until last year. I was a campus rabbi at Elon. One of the things that I'm not a white person, so y'all can figure this out, but this makes people think differently about how they treat people, and it's distinctive. It's a guttural thing. It's not necessarily an intellectual thing. So the assistant director of Hillel, a woman came in with their daughter. The assistant director said, "I'll go get her." The assistant director said to the mother, "This is our rabbi, Rabbi Sandra Lawson." The mother looked at me and said, "Are you ordained?" So no campus would ever hire I don't even know how that question was so foreign to me. And I and this is like before when I went to shake her hand or something back when we did that, and she just had this like look of curiosity, question on her face. She asked me some form of that question like 3 times. My responsibility in that role was to make sure the daughter's needs were met, because the daughter is going to be a student on my campus. I don't really care about the mother so much in that case. And so I needed to figure out a way to quickly make the daughter more comfortable, because she was like looking like she wanted to get the hell out of there. And so I just said to the mom, I said, "Yeah, let me give you a tour of our building. I have a business card that says rabbi on it that might help." And that was it. I have had people say to me when they find I'm a rabbi, "Are you a Jewish rabbi?" I've had people say to me, "I thought you had to be Jewish to be a rabbi." When I was a student, people said to me, "Don't you have to be Jewish to go to rabbinical school?" I've had people forget that they knew that I was Jewish when I told them that I was going to rabbinical school. So that's some of the things that happened to me. And also, every Black rabbi I know has a similar story. Like, so these are, What?
I can't believe, I mean, I believe you. I obviously believe you, but I'm like astounded that anybody would say these things. I can't get over it.
Everybody is, but it happens.
I know. I'm just blown away.
Yeah.
If you're called a rabbi, you're freaking ordained.
Yeah.
Somebody producing you as a rabbi.
And I also want to say too, during orientation every year, I could always tell the parents that had read my bio that knew who the rabbi was versus the ones that didn't. Who knew the campus had a Black rabbi versus the ones that didn't. All right. So Luis, I just want to thank you for that question and having the courage to ask that question, because I know that when we were talking before about silence and non-action, like the only way to learn is to ask. And because you asked doesn't mean I have to answer, but I chose to answer.
Yes, and thank you. I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much for hearing me. So there's another part of what I'm feeling, I guess, which I'll also say, which is sometimes it's hard to believe, and this is about our congregation. I think, well, who are these people who are saying these insensitive things? I mean, it could be me, I suppose, and I don't know it.
I think that's the key point, Louise, for all of us, is it could be us.
Well, it's like when you were saying anybody can walk into a space and know if it's a safe space for the Cdt, it's going to be a safe space, namely because it was a non-issue. And I think what I'm learning today is that everyone just wants a sacred and a holy space, and not wanting to come in to educate, to teach, for their humanness to be the first thing that's seen, and to deal with these barriers are just the injury. But the deeper injury is that it's one thing work, it's another thing for your sacred and holy spaces to feel like this. And so I think we do have a lot of work to do to have somebody walk in and feel like can be home.
So I'd like to speak if I might.
It seemed like Chanda was gonna say something.
Can I just interrupt? Partly because like I have to prepare for a wedding, so which I'm very excited, and I want to take positive energy into as well. I made a comment in this chat that Kevin and I actually came to CDT having like run away from a congregation where we were experiencing racism in Boston. And I think it's important to highlight that one of the reasons that we first went to that congregation, besides it being more transportationally efficient than being members of CDT, which is something I'd originally considered, was helmed by a gay rabbi. And there were lots of queer people in the congregation, which for me as a queer person who had actually fairly recently at that point come out of a gay marriage, it was really important to me to not go into a space that felt like super straight. And we had to deal with the racism there. And so I just want to highlight that, like, you know, that's one piece, right? But we as people of color, and me as a queer person of color, experienced that space very differently than like the white queer people did. But I think, you know, to the question of am I the perpetrator? Like, yes, probably. Like, I think that everybody should go into the thing with like, yes, probably on their mind, and then figure out like, what does it mean to become more aware of the ways in which I might be that person. So in my case, like, you know, 2 years into, a year and a half into joining CDT, someone asked me about being Mizrahi, and I was like, I don't know shit about being Mizrahi, actually. My last name is Weinstein. That should like clarify that. And that was clearly about my skin color, right? That was very clearly about my skin color. I mean, for me, it was informative as an Ashkenazi Jew. There's lots of discussion about Ashkenazi centrism. And it's worth highlighting that Ashkenazim of color don't actually experience that in the same way, because we're presumed not Ashkenazi. And that when we talk about race in synagogues, that often there's this unspoken mapping of Ashkenazi to white, while people are also denying that whiteness is a phenomenon in our temples. But you're also eyeballing people and saying, well, you're clearly not Ashkenazi like me. And that's really, you're not white like me. That's what that comment was. So I just think, you know, I think it's great that people want to kind of like unpack like how this is all making them feel and what their reactions are to the things that Rabbi Sandra and I said. And I think it would be great for people to engage the spaces that CDT has created already to have those conversations. And that also, and I know we have one of the leaders, I think Alan has been playing a leading role in one of those spaces. And I know that Bob Warren has also been engaged with that work. So I want to invite people, rather than just being in reactive mode right now in this moment, to maybe sit with what they're thinking about and what they're feeling, and then take that to the places where these conversations are happening. And I say places because there's, you know, a group that's specifically thinking about racial justice. There's also a group that's thinking about the economic disparities. So somebody mentioned that in the chat, and that is another site of racial justice. The two things are not separate. So I think I'm going to say that I'm cutting myself off for the moment, but I wanted that to be kind of, you know, there are these spaces that are happening, and I want to caution people against being really reactive in this moment and thinking that you need to like pull things from the Jews of color who are in front of you just because they're there, right? So thanks everyone for coming.
Chanda. Have a great time at your wedding, and thank you for ending us with that.
Yeah.
Like
Eileen had a comment though. Eileen, go ahead.
Yeah, but Chanda, if you
Chanda needs to go. Yeah. Bye. I'll stick around for a little bit.
So I am by my lineage, I am a Sephardic Jew, but I am racially ambiguous, and in the summer I look black. Okay, so I've been asked. The question was asked, well, who says these things? Who says these things? Your family says these things. Your family says to you at a wedding, why do you wear your hair that way? And I said, well, why wouldn't I wear my hair this way? And then, oh, I'm sure I don't know, you know, or going into Jewish spaces being asked if I'm Sephardic, which I know relates to my skin color. You know, so you end up being in a weird place because you're not Black enough for Blacks and you're not white enough for white Jews. And I have never, as a young person and even older, I was never seen as an attractive option for marriage. I never had a date with a Jewish boy. Okay. So, you know, that, and then that led me to identify with Black people. But then I'm not really accepted completely there either. So and I think there are many people who look ambiguous in our culture. And I identified also, I taught English as a second language to adults for many years. And I would tell them in my introduction that I was born in the United States. And always, you know, people would forget that. And I think they forgot it partly because of my appearance and maybe partly because I knew a lot about their cultures, which most Americans don't know much about other people's culture. So I just wanted to say, you know, that who's making these comments? We are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Eileen. All right. I think it's time to say good Shabbos. And Eileen, I really appreciate your sharing vulnerably about your experience. It's really important. And I think that Ashkenazi like assertion of Jewish normalcy in most American Jewish spaces has caused so much hurt and exclusion. And I'm grateful to hear your story. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos.